ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this fabulous tech talk by Mr. Jono Bacon, who you may know from his contributions to KDE, or to GNOME, or to Jacosher, or possibly from his illustrious career in a metal band or as a solo artist. But he's most widely known for his role as the Ubuntu Community Manager working for Canonical, and today he will be discussing with us Standing on the Shoulders of Giants, the coming of the Linux desktop. Jono.
Right. Hello? Everyone all right?
Oh, yeah.
Hello? I thought you people were supposed to be exciting Google people. It doesn't sound like it. Should we maybe try French? Would that be better? How about bonjour?
Bonjour.
Oh, come on.
Hi, y'all.
Hi, y'all. Maybe Klingon. Nuke neck? Is that good? All right, I can see you looking at me and you're thinking, okay, this English guy is over in our glorious sunny climate. And he feels uncomfortable and possibly unwell from the plain food and the sushi. So let's try. How about, well, hello? Can you try that? Come on, everyone. Well, hello. Well, hello. Hey.
Your slide is kind of...
Well, hell. Woo! You know when I said that the thing on the side wasn't going to cause any problems? I'm thinking through every slide now. The great thing is that you sound English, so if you come to England, you'll fit in like the rest of us. Because you sound like these people. Okay? So you can live in a very large house and contribute nothing to the country as well. Not bitter. Did you say this is being videoed? So, my name's Jono. I work for Canonical as the Ubuntu Community Manager, and my job is to basically help the Ubuntu community do interesting things that benefits Ubuntu, and in turn makes a great free desktop and server and mobile solution for people. And it's a fun job, and I work from home, and one of the nice things is coming out to do talks. So, this talk is going to be about the desktop, which is illustriously reflected in this image. The desktop is something that a lot of people get very, very excited about because if you look at the IT world, basically you can split it into three approximate areas. You've got the desktop, you've got the server, and then you've got mobile. And the desktop, there's a bit of an emotional connection there, because you live in it. You can change the wallpaper, you can change the fonts, you spend most of your time in it, you work in it, you source entertainment in it, you look at kind of lolcats and YouTube videos and all these kinds of things in the desktop. Most people don't get that emotionally connected to a server. The kind of people who get emotionally connected to servers get emotionally connected to vegetables, It's unusual types of people. Does anyone here get emotionally connected to vegetables? Good, don't want to alienate people. So the desktop is something that a lot of people find interesting and we care about. Now, through this presentation, if you go to presentation theory, people say, there's 2 or 3 different things that you should put in your presentation, 3 facts that your audience should take away from you. And in an hour, it can be very, very difficult to figure out what are the 3 things you've got to take away. So I was thinking, how do I make this easier for my audience, right? And there's really only one man who can solve this problem for us. There's only one man. Some people say he doesn't sleep, he just waits, okay? That man is, of course, Chuck Norris. Chuck Norris is the solution to all of our problems. So throughout this presentation, I will be referring to the Chuck Norris scorecard, okay? So you can kind of, each of these important key things, as I go through it, you can kind of pick out and apply. So before I start, what areas do you people work in? You obviously work at Google. Unless some of you walked in for the free food. I mean, I don't know, maybe that guy over there. But what area, what do you work in? Do you work in the desktop? Do you work in the server? Chuck Norris is on my side, and Huckabee's side. One and the same, from what I can tell. So what server stuff? Do you work in programmers?
Most of us do server stuff.
Most of you do server stuff, so most of you are emotionally connected to vegetables. Okay. Uh-oh. Sorry?
GUI test automation.
GUI test automation, okay. Anything else? Servers and GUI testing. Search engine? Sorry? They're too busy. Okay.
They've seen your talk already.
Okay, so if we look at the desk, I mean, how many of you use Linux? Okay, yeah, so a lot of people using Linux. And how many of you have been using Linux for the last sort of 10 years? So we've got some old timers who have been using it for a while. You'll probably know that the desktop has been through something of an evolution. This is the idiot's representation of evolution. And I first got involved in Linux about 10 years ago as well. And back then, to install Linux on your computer, you needed a soldering iron and a very steady hand. It was impossibly difficult to install on a computer. And my brother, who has even less hair than I do, spent 2 weeks installing it on my machine. Slackware 96. Did anyone ever use that? Yeah? Oof. So back then, that was kind of when I started seeing the evolution of the desktop. And I'm going to go through some of the elements of this evolution, and I'd like some of you who've used some of these desktops to put one hand up, and if you're still using it, put two hands up. Okay? So let's start with MWM. How many have used it? You very nearly put two hands up.
I use it long enough to change to something like Window Maker.
Okay. That's reasonable. So anyone still using MWM? No? So MWM had two purposes in life. One was to put windows on the screen, and the other one was to make them look ugly, as can be seen in this image. And people used it to just run lots of terminals. That's pretty much the way it worked. So you can think of this if we compare this to human evolution, you can kind of think of this as sort of the 1400s. And this was around the time when things were pretty basic. And then if we kind of flip forward, we kind of flip towards sort of modernization beginning to happen, okay? Maybe the mid-1800s, maybe early 1900s. Things started to get interesting. We had GNOME 1.0. Anyone use that? Yeah? Anyone using KDE around that time instead? Okay, so things were we're starting to see the kind of the core bits and pieces of the desktop starting to shape. That was all pretty good. Now, life went on, and we got to the 50s, and then kind of the 60s, 70s. The bong was invented. People started having promiscuous sex. Free love, drugs, hippies, Woodstock. It was the era of enlightenment, okay? This is what happens when technical people think they can draw. And enlightenment's excellent because it really showed what creativity was possible in the desktop. And even though some of it was garish and ugly, it showed what people could do without being constrained by different commercial entities. People were just free to do what they wanted to do, and that was excellent. And then, of course, we flipped through, towards sort of today, and we've got things like KDE4. Is anyone using KDE4 at the moment? No? Anyone using GNOME 2.0? Yeah, so most people are GNOME people, apart from the Window Maker guy. So KDE4 is an excellent achievement for the KDE team, and they're kind of defining the next generation of the desktop and where that's moving forward. So the KDE team have really pushed something impressive out there. I think their release event was held over here, wasn't it? Sort of. By me, yes. Is that right? Okay. So throughout all of this evolution, right back to the early days, we've seen this sentence. Oh, no, we haven't. Who's using loads of terminals on their desktop? Why? Coding. I suppose if you're server people, you just need to pretty much write code, not look at pretty pictures.
It's a nice way to keep a whole lot of state cleanly arranged in front of you.
Yeah.
Or the aspect.
Okay.
I can do multitasking with terminals.
This is true. So,
Let's see the utilization.
this is a lovely screenshot. Yeah. Anyway, so we've seen this sentence throughout the years. We've all got an opinion on this, And everyone's. I remember someone saying 1998 was the year of the Linux desktop. I mean, it really, really wasn't the year of the Linux desktop. And each year we look back and it looks even more ludicrous than the year before. When we look back to 1998, 1997 looked even more ridiculous. So everybody's got their own theory about what we're going to fill in those four letters. My view is that you should put the word fail in there because that sentence means nothing. But when you actually sit down, and people rat on the era of the Linux desktop and say, you know, the era of the Linux desktop, you know, it's never going to happen. We never know when it's going to happen. When people sit down and think about it, there's actually some premise in the concept of the era of the Linux desktop, because it's kind of when we start seeing success kind of beginning to happen. You know, we start seeing lots and lots of people beginning to use Linux and taking an interest in using Linux. You know, I get on a train now, and I see people using Linux on their on their laptops. And to me, that's something of an achievement. Of course, your laptop doesn't last very long on an English train. It will be stolen and put on eBay. But that's a whole extra story. So when we look at the Linux desktop and we look at where it's kind of going, I think you can identify success by breaking it down into two areas, okay? The first one is opportunity. What opportunities do we associate with the desktop? What opportunities are available? Where are people deriding some kind of opportunity? Why are we interested in this, okay? And when we think of the success of the Linux desktop, we invariably think, well, you know what? It's kind of businesses who are interested in the success of the desktop. But it's not necessarily just businesses, because there's a few different areas. So businesses are obvious, right? They're interested in Linux on the desktop because it's better technology. It's a lower total cost of ownership. You know, they basically want to get good technology and it costs them nothing. That's their primary aim in life. And Linux is interesting because just at the technology level, a lot of people are thinking, well, you know, it can do this, it can replace these parts of our infrastructure. Its reliability has been proven in many different areas. And other people have jumped before us. So we're starting to see more and more interest from the business community in terms of this. And obviously, Linux has got a very, very close relationship to the word free. So people think, well, it's obviously not going to be free, but the total cost of ownership has got to be lower. Just the theory behind it seems that it's going to be lower. So businesses like the idea of it. Then we look at developers. Now, this room is full of developers. And, of course, one of the main reasons why developers like it, and I've done some development, I wouldn't call myself a developer. If you read my code, you wouldn't call me a developer either. When you look at, obviously from a development perspective, open source is interesting because there's an intrinsic development culture there. Everything is about development. It's all done out in the open. It's kind of like the computer equivalent of nudism, you know? Everything's out there swinging in the breeze. You can see what's going on. It's all been openly developed on the internet, on mailing lists, and all the rest of it. So from a development perspective, it's pretty interesting. And developers aren't going to complain at lots of code being on the internet and lots of development tools out there to maintain it. And obviously from a community perspective, now how many people here would say that they consider themselves part of the open source community? So some of you are probably Windows and Mac people. From a community perspective, we like the idea of the Linux desktop because it just feels right, you know. When we look at all of the technical reasons and all the cost reasons and all of these other bits and pieces, when we look at all of that and we can prove it and we're happy that we've proven that, we sit back and we think, well, in addition to that, it's just ethically right. It's just the right thing to do. It's like switching your lights off before you leave your house for a week. It's like riding a bike to work instead of riding a car to work. It just feels like the right thing to do. So there's a huge amount of opportunity out there, and that's the reason why people are interested in the desktop with that emotional connection that they've got attached to it. Now, of course, we have concerns as well. So when we're talking about the success of the Linux desktop, we also have a bunch of concerns. Now, if you look at this in reverse order, right, you can look at the community. The community generally doesn't really have concerns because we buy into the idea of it. Nothing new there. So from a community perspective, it's pretty cool. It feels ethically right. The technology's there. It's all good. From a developer's perspective, invariably, there's not that much of an issue with it. Invariably, a lot of developers who don't choose to use open source development tools, so let's say you don't code in Python or Perl or something like that, and you prefer .NET and Microsoft's incarnation of .NET, not Mono, or you prefer Visual Basic, God forbid. If that's your perspective, invariably you don't think the concept of an open source desktop is a bad thing, but you just don't choose to use that technology. You know, there's not many technologies out there that people fundamentally rat on, with the possible exception of Haskell. People just seem to have it in for Haskell. And Fortran. Anyone have any things that they hate? No? This company really isn't evil, is it? We don't have bad thoughts. So there are some concerns. Now, but the concerns, where the concerns generally lay, are with these people. This is the internet's representation of business people in all of its politically correct goodness, okay? Business people do have concerns about the Linux desktop because it's just a bit weird. I mean, if you're a business, you understand software because what you do is you go out, you buy the software, or you buy a computer with the software on it, and it generally comes from a company, and that company makes that product and they give it to you. That's the way, you know, economics works. But of course, with the open source thing, there's all of these, you know, there's the great and washed out there who are writing a lot of the software, and so businesses don't quite understand how that works. So there's a concern there. It's unproven, you know. We're starting to see more and more take up, but it's not. It feels different for a lot of businesses. I used to work as a consultant, and a lot of businesses, they could, even though they could justify all of the reasons why they should be considering Linux on their desktop, a lot of them were just like, well, we understand it all makes sense, but it just feels a bit weird, you know? And so these concerns happen. And I suspect a significant reason for this is because of the community. Because businesses think that, you know, it's run by people like this. And these people, you know, they're trying to put communism in the water, you know? That's a bad thing, you know? This, incidentally, is my best friend, so he doesn't know it's in here. He will do when this is on the internet. So he really is everything that is wrong with the open source community. So businesses have this. If we look where we are at the moment, you know, businesses, we suspect, play a significant role in the success of the desktop. And the businesses are then, in turn, a little confused about the community side of things. But what it all boils down to is this, technology. Because when they get back on the track, they think, well, hang on a second, let's look at the technology. So a business thinks, you know, I'm hearing a lot about Linux, I'm hearing a lot about open source. Why don't we perform a bit of an investigation into the technology? Identify whether it would be worth us investing in this, okay? And it doesn't take long before a business will realize pretty much how things work. I'm sure none of this will be new to you guys, but using Ubuntu as an example, because I'm unbelievably biased, this obviously applies to any Linux distribution. What we do is we take lots of open source software out there, which we refer to as upstreams. We take those upstreams and we package it together into a system that's easy to use and easy to install. I mean, you can literally take an Ubuntu CD, and you can put it upside down in a floppy disk drive, and it will still install. It's that easy, okay? So this is how it works. We take upstream software, we package it together, we make some modifications, we configure it, and then we issue a CD or issue an ISO which people can burn and install. So when a business is looking into this and they realize how this model works, they then look, that's the solution, but they then look back at some of the other things. This is what we need to ensure in whatever we install on our computers. We need to make sure it's managed. Now, this is the most corporate slide in this slide deck, so I just ignore this for a second, okay? I don't want your eyes to glaze over. But people look for managed software. It needs to be managed. It needs to, you know, a business is looking for their system, their software solution they want it to be managed by an organization. They want to make sure that that product has a good feature direction, a good roadmap, regular releases, security updates, all that kind of stuff. They want it to be reliable. They want to make sure that it's going to work. It's not going to be crashing all the time. It's not going to be susceptible to viruses, all that kind of stuff. And of course, that it's sustained. You don't want to buy a product and then have it discontinued a week later. Now, typically, businesses will look to, you know, the people who make the software for this. So invariably with Windows, they look to Microsoft. You know, so Microsoft are there to make sure that the software is managed. They're there to make sure it's reliable. Microsoft and reliable don't go very well together in a sentence, I admit. And then they look for it to be sustained as well. But the thing is, of course, you know, when they look at the open source thing, they're like, it's the community again. It keeps coming back to this C word, you know? And then they think, well, hang on a second, we know about the community because that's the people who put the communism in the water, yeah? And it all boils back down to this. So they can look at the most incredible software solution, but invariably, if they don't understand this community aspect, then it's going to cause some concern. And this is the future of the Linux desktop that we're talking about. The problem, of course, is that businesses basically don't understand community. I mean, I work full-time with an open source community, and I'm not going to profess that I know everything about it by any stretch, because it's an incredibly complicated set of variables. But if there's one thing I have discovered, is that it's amazing how much people don't understand how people work together in every step. Because on one side you've got like theoretical types who will talk about, you know, all of these psychological and anthropological theories behind how people talk to each other, you know, using hand gestures and weird noises, right? And then on the other side, you just got people who have no idea and don't really care how people work together. It just kind of works out. And socially inept people trying to figure out how people are social with each other is very difficult, you know. So businesses are just as inept when it comes to understanding how people work together. So it's a big unknown, and it's not something a business can really say, okay, I want to budget this anthropological study into how people work together so we can figure out whether this software is worth it's worth installing and using. And one of the reasons for this is that we in the open source world think of ourselves as being the fine example of community in action, you know, thousands of people around the world connected by the network, talking to each other, working together, making software happen, all this kind of stuff. But we're actually quite weird and different, because if you look at most communities around games and DVDs and movies, books, music, all of these kinds of things that people flock around, they're typically consumers, right? Trekkies are a great example of this. Does anyone here like Star Trek? Keep your hands up. Put your hand down if you don't dress up. You dress up?
No, too many negatives.
I gave this talk at the SoCal Linux Expo, and there was about 500 people in the room or whatever. There's loads of people in this room. And I said the same thing. I said, how many people here are Trekkies? And I said, does anyone here actually dress up? And this one woman put her hand up. And she said to me, I spoke to her afterwards, and she said that she thought loads of other people were going to put their hands up. And then she kind of looked round, and she was a bit freaked out. But she was proud. She's not embarrassed, and that's a good thing. So most communities that we talk to are actually user communities. They're people who are essentially fanboys and fangirls. They flock around something because they enjoy it, and they want to find other people who also enjoy it, meeting of minds. Whereas we're a little different. We're actually contributors. We make software. We make stuff happen. And this is the fine example of it happening with the groupies, which I have to say I've not seen. So this is from Guadec. But we're a contributor community. We make the software. We actually make it happen. You know, we produce things. We don't just flock around it. I mean, obviously there are a large user community that uses open source, but fundamentally we actually make it. So that makes it even more fundamental, because the software that's been delivered in desktops and enterprise systems around the world, each one of us is having an impact on. So when you boil it down, of course, businesses, they depend on us. We're important, and they should realize it. Businesses do depend on us, okay? Now, if we check in with Chuck Norris for a second, because he's the man who knows everything. Community is important to desktop success. This is clear. It's not just important to people who buy into the community and want to join the community. It's not just a case of if you're a community person, community is important. Community is important to everybody, because it all boils down to the fundamental level that upstream software is packaged and delivered to people. And the people who make that upstream software are community. So if we move on a little bit, about half of this room seemed to think that seemed to say that they were in the open source world and use open source software and the rest of it. I'd like that number of people for a second to feel pretty smug, okay? Feel nice and smug and happy with yourselves, right? Not only because you work at Google, and that's a good thing, and everyone loves Google, right? But feel smug because just think about the success of open source in the last 10 years. Just think about how far it's gone. You know, just normal people having a huge impact on millions of people around the world. It's pretty cool when you think about it. It's pretty nice. It's pretty cool when you sit back and you think, wow, you know, this disconnected group of people who then get connected, can produce this worldwide phenomenon. It's pretty stunning. But then, people then throw these kinds of figures out at you of how many people are actually using it. And you think, I was feeling pretty smug for a second there, you know. I thought that we were starting to really kick ass around the world. And then people say, well, you know, less than 1% or less than 2% of the IT world are actually using Linux on desktops and servers and whatnot. And at that point, we generally fall into a pit of depression and drink a lot of tequila, you know, because that solves all of your problems. It does. But when we look at this figure, it doesn't really matter. Because A, it's wrong, and B, it doesn't really matter. Because the reason why it's wrong is that with openly distributed software, you cannot figure out how many people are using it. It's just impossible. And the best job that you've got is employing people who think they know what they're talking about to advise on how many people are using the desktop. These people, of course, are called analysts. You know, so they basically develop these research studies, and they advise on how many people are using the software. But there's no way of determining that. I mean, people come up to me all the time and say, how many people are using Ubuntu? And I say to them, I don't really know. I couldn't give you any firm figures. I've got a guess, but I couldn't tell you. And they're convinced that at Canonical we have some kind of secret system that we can use to count people as if everyone who downloads a copy of Ubuntu is microchipped or something, you know. We have no idea, because I could give this chap a CD and he could, of course, give it to all of you guys, and you could never connect to a network. And so, you know, that banishes the idea of it syncing with a server or something to register a user. There's just no way of us determining it. And so that figure, I think you have to take with a pinch of salt. But the other thing is that figure is not important, how many people are actually using the software. The most important thing that we have right now is mindshare. Everybody is raving about open source. Everybody is raving about Linux. Okay? Mindshare is critical, because when people are always hearing about something, they'll invariably say, well, I keep hearing about this thing, so therefore I should really check it out. I mean, look at Facebook. You know, nobody really used Facebook that much apart from kids. And then everybody started getting Facebook accounts, and all of your friends then had a Facebook account, and then your mum had a Facebook account, and then your grandma had a Facebook account, and that's when it freaked you out a little bit. So you thought, well, if my gran's got a Facebook account, I really need to get one. And then your gran friends you. Your gran should never friend you. That's wrong on so many levels, right? So mindshare it defines success. It doesn't necessarily define usable success, but it defines a reasonable amount of success. So people get the mindshare and then they cling on to it, and that's when they start checking into stuff. A lot of businesses out there, a lot of universities will have said, I've heard about this Linux thing. You know, a lot of people seem to be talking about it. I read a lot about it in the press and on the internet. Therefore, I should really check into it, because any responsible professional would do that, and check up and coming technology. Now, what's interesting is when you look at mindshare, of course, we have Google Trends, right? Google Trends. Does anyone here work on Google Trends? Because I want to buy people who work on Google Trends a pint. It's just nice. Google Trends is awesome. I'm sure you're all familiar with it, but basically you can type in a couple of different terms, and then it will show you the number of searches, essentially, that have happened on Google. Because, of course, Google is the way of defining what humankind is thinking right now. And what's interesting about this is that it seems like fewer and fewer people are searching for Linux. And more people are searching for brands of distributions like Ubuntu. So we're seeing life heading towards more of a brand kind of way of doing things. And you know what? The reason why I like Google Trends is that finally, once and for all, Google have solved what I consider one of the most important challenges that man and womankind has ever faced. Ever, right? Google Trends has solved this problem elegantly and efficiently, because Google Trends finally, once and for all, categorically states dogs are better than cats. I cannot stand cats, right? Arrogant, annoying animals that they are, that demand a door to be built in your house. I mean, they're just crazy. So Google Trends, we can believe everything. So because Google Trends has proven this, therefore we can see that the trend, the trend towards brands is pretty accurate. And so therefore, there's more of a reliance on people like this, on these particular brands. You can broadly divide the popular Linux distribution model into these three that have a commercial counterpart. So I'm excluding Debian and Slackware and Gentoo here. Ubuntu obviously has Canonical as a counterpart. Red Hat is Red Hat, and they have Fedora as their distro. And OpenSUSE has Novell and Microsoft as their counterpart. So we can see these different distros have these companies attached as well. So what this in turn means is that these companies have a responsibility towards this community. They have a responsibility to fostering and growing the community. And unfortunately, traditionally, if you look back at the open source timeline, the way companies have interacted with community has sometimes been less than stellar, shall we say. Some companies have not really encouraged community, they've merely tolerated it. They've just kind of dealt with it and sort of said, those kind of weird people over there who are in the community, we'll just keep them at arm's length and make sure that they're happy, because it would be a PR disaster if they weren't happy. But we don't really want to engage with them that much. We want to keep them at arm's length. And then some of these companies realize that that's just a disastrous thing to do in the open source world. So they started engaging more and more and more. And I'm pleased to see that certainly all of the major distros are engaging with the open source community intrinsically. So, Mr. Norris makes it very abundantly clear to us that distributors are important to desktop success. It's not just the community, but distributors play a key role in that as well. And it's therefore integral that these distributors have their own responsibility on where they're moving forward. So, the community can make the era of the desktop happen. We joke about the era of the desktop being pointless and useless, but the community really is intrinsically making that happen. It's not just these businesses buying the desktop that is going to make it happen. It's not just OEM deals and all that kind of stuff. They play a part, but it's not just them. And I think what's always useful, how many people, put your hand up if you are part of an open source project? So you contribute to, am I right in thinking you contribute to open source projects, right? You contribute open source code, and that code lives outside Google. Yeah? So you're not just writing this code because you're a Google employee. You're interested in it, as well as a hobby, right? It's always useful to sit down and think, well, how does that community that I'm a part of, how does it work, and how can I make sure it works efficiently? And it's interesting to sometimes sit down and think, well, how can I improve my own interaction and the interactions of my peers to make the most of that community? And when you do this, it's always important to separate out domain knowledge. It's interesting when you talk to people who aren't in the open source community about how they solve certain problems, because a lot of the assumptions that we make don't exist. So, for example, if something goes wrong in an open source application, the perceived wisdom is that what you do is you file a bug. Pretty much most people say the best thing to do to be a good citizen is you file a bug. And that assumes a lot of things. That first of all assumes that you know what a bug is. That also assumes that you know that we have open bug trackers. I mean, if something breaks in a Microsoft product, or something breaks in an Apple product, generally you think to yourself, well, that's someone else's problem. I'll just wait until it gets fixed, and then someone else will have discovered that problem and sort it out. Because I'm certainly unaware of any public bug tracker that you can reliably go to, report the bug, and get an update on the progress of that bug being fixed. Whereas, of course, in the open source world, all of this stuff lives on the internet. So we kind of assume that this kind of thing happens. So we assume when we talk to other people, other developers, who might not necessarily be in the open source world, that they know that public bug trackers exist. So separate out the domain knowledge. And one person who's really, really good at this is Linus Torvalds. I'm sure pretty much all of you know he's the guy who started the Linux kernel. Linus is incredible on so many levels. I'm a huge fan of him because not only is he incredibly smart, he's an excellent developer, I'm also a big fan of him because he's very, very, very funny. And he's got an incredibly cynical wit about him, which in itself is a good thing, being English, because we're pretty cynical people as well. But the thing as well is that he really is a balanced, down-to-earth human being, which I think is important as well. He takes a pretty moderate stance on various aspects. I love that you can see this in this photo. If you look in the top right-hand corner, you can see this guy sticking some fingers behind some other guy's head. I mean, Linus approved this photo with him stood there looking all Tom Cruise-like, and there's arsehole in the background kind of sticking the fingers up, you know? I mean, huge amount of respect for Linus. Now, he wrote this book. Anyone read this? No? This is an excellent book. So he wrote this book with David Diamond, who I'm reliably assured from extensive research is not related to Neil Diamond. And this book basically talks about his life, where he came from, and how he got into Linux, how he got into software development, and how he made Linux and all the rest of it. And in this book, he talks about his theory of the meaning of life, and it's very funny. And he basically says that, well, you need to kind of satisfy some core aspects of your life, and then you can then move on to other things. So you might start out by making sure you've got basic sort of needs covered, like food and water and all that kind of stuff. And then you want to make sure that you have a social element to your life, and then you can really start achieving bits and pieces. What he actually did with this is he ripped off this. Anyone know what this is? Maslow. You probably studied this at school. We studied it at school in England. This is Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. Now, I'm not going to get too theoretical because it would bore all of us. Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs basically shows your core, most basic needs at the bottom, and then as you build and satisfy each of these needs, it shows you the other typical things that people want. And Maslow sat down and tried to think about and distill human needs into this triangle. And so I'm going to have a quick look through this because this can offer some interesting insight into how we can work with communities. So right at the bottom, you've got the most basic stuff. This is, this is the rubber on a car kind of stuff. You've got food and water and shelter, clothing. You don't see many successful open source developers out in the world, naked, cold, hungry, thirsty. These people generally don't exist. I mean, you need these basic things to function. And then, of course, once you've got these basic elements, you're basically someone who can live, actually physically survive in the world. So the next thing you can start building on is security. You need to feel secure in your surroundings, and it's disturbing how many people in the world don't have this. There's a lot of people, millions of people around the world who don't have this most basic of needs due to invariably political fighting and war and famine and stuff like that. Okay, so once you've got the basics for life and you feel in a safe area, we can then start looking at some of the real things that we can harness in the open source world. Love and belonging. I can see people looking scared already at me using the word love because we're all fearful of commitment. I don't want to turn this into a Barry White kind of music video, but
we have lots of commit counts.
Nice. People have people in any community. You have people care about each other. I've been in the open source community, like I say, for about 10 years, and there's a number of people who I consider very, very close friends in that community who I don't just, not just because I like to work with them and I can talk with them about technology, but they're my friends, and as my friends, I care about them, and I want to make sure that they're all right, and it's reciprocal, and this happens all over the world. People do genuinely care about each other, and when you join a community and you feel like someone's got your back, you feel like someone's looking out for you. That's an incredibly worthwhile feeling to have, and that's something that we invariably lack in our local communities more and more, when people don't know their neighbors and things like that. Whereas we're all connected to the internet and we can share a sense of that. So once you've got that, people start beginning to feel fuzzy. And that's what we want. So the success in community is feeling fuzzy. Okay? So then we go to the next level. Now this is really where I think when you've got really good community people, and I'm excluding, of course, any technical ability here, right? This assumes someone who's good at what they do. Real community success is when people feel a sense of self-esteem, and when people feel well respected by other people. Okay? If you feel pretty damn cool and pretty damn good at what you're doing, and you feel that other people think you're pretty damn good and pretty damn cool, then that is an incredible feeling. Okay? And that's what people who get involved in communities, that's what will drive a lot of them. Now, Maslow I think he may have took some drugs or something, because we then get to this next couple of levels. And at this point, it gets pretty hand-wavy. Because if you get above that, then you talk about experiencing purpose and meaning and realizing all inner potentials and all this kind of stuff, you know. And also, you know, the need for self-actualization. And there's basically two types of people who experience this. One is Buddhists, who seem really good at this kind of stuff. And the other is arseholes. People who disappear up their own arse. This is a problem. If you want a detailed definition of an arsehole, I suggest you look at Bono on Wikipedia. Lots of content there. So Maslow talks about things that are relevant fundamentally to individuals, but it doesn't really talk about groups, because of course you take a bunch of groups, a bunch of individuals, you put them together into a group, and that makes a community. And there's all kinds of other stuff associated with that: expectations and opportunities, responsibilities, growth, risks, all this kind of stuff. And I'm not going to talk about that because the last presentation I took around the place is called "How to Herd Cats and Influence People," and that basically talks about some of these elements. So check that out on YouTube. But fundamentally, when you put people together in a community and they start working together, there's a whole group dynamic that's built on top of those individual dynamics. And anyone who claims that they know how that works is a liar, because nobody knows how it works. We've all got theories, but nobody fundamentally knows how people work together. It's just impossible to gauge. So earlier on, I was talking about these two things. Community is important and distributors are important. You know? We've got, if you look at where we stand, we think, okay, we want success on the desktop. And we typically think, well, a significant proportion of that success is going to be businesses and organizations making use of it. They then see that it has this upstream model where upstream software is then packaged and released. But then they look at the upstream software and they realize that that's all community that's generally driving a lot of that. So we can see how community and distributors then play a pretty critical role in that. And when you think about how to improve how we work at a community level, I'm going to look at both of these. At a community level, it all basically boils down to working together. Now, each of you people who works in an open source project, if you stand back and think to yourselves, how can I improve how I work with other people? And this can be really, really basic things, like just being nicer to people, you know? Not, you know, when somebody says something you disagree with, not feeling an unbelievable urge to troll them, you know? Little things like this can really help a community, because we all know what it's like. Somebody says something that is idiotic 2.0, and you think to yourself, I need to pick them up on this, you know? It's for their own welfare. I need to help them. And what that can actually cause is discontent in that community. And sometimes people feel like they're doing something in the best interest of the community, but then it causes a flame war. And flame wars have no benefit to anybody, because the original participants, they never agree. They just find themselves even more divided. And the rest of the community, who sits by and watches and doesn't participate because they don't want to get their fingers eaten off, they just feel more insecure. Because remember, the fundamental thing on Maslow is feeling security. That doesn't just apply to your physical surroundings, but that applies to your community as well. So I recommend, as something we can all do, just sit down for 5 minutes. Doesn't matter where you are, in the shower or wherever you tend to think and there's no distractions. Sit down and think about how you interact with people. Just sit down and think, how was I today? Take a day and think, on this particular day, how did I interact with these people? Could I have maybe been a bit unreasonable with someone? Or could I have maybe helped someone more? Or am I doing a really good job? And should I, therefore, help other people to understand how to do that really good job? Think pretty objectively. Think about how other people would assess you. Imagine having a performance review. Those kinds of things can really help, because really subtle changes can significantly affect how a community project can run. And that, of course, propagates up to the wider picture. But I also want to talk a little bit about something which I believe is a significant threat to the open source community, and that's the vocal minority. Now, I'm not accusing any specific minority of this. What I'm talking about here is people who have a particular perspective on something and do everything in their power to ram it down your throat. This can apply to lots of different areas. And the reason why I think this is a threat is that people get very, very emotionally connected to open source software because we all feel we're on an ethical crusade, and we're marching forward, an army united by a consistent vision to spread free software around the world. And consequently, people get very, very passionate about that. They live and they breathe it, literally live and they breathe it. So consequently, when they find people who they may deem as unbelievers, it's time to chop them off at the knees. And the thing that concerns me about this is that I know a number of people in the open source world who have left the open source community because of these people doing this. It's one thing to have very, very strong views and to debate them effectively. It's one thing to stand in a room and really take a different perspective than somebody else and to debate it. But it's when it's an unrelenting force that never leaves that person alone. That's when it's disruptive. And it basically boils down to bullying. And unfortunately, there's some people in our community who take a very strong ethical stance when it comes to freedom, who believe that everything on a machine, everything on a computer should be 100% free. And if you have a kernel, and there are some binary blobs in that kernel, then you're evil. Everything about you is wrong. And all of your children will be wrong as well. And we're right when we say it. And it's like, the problem with this perspective, in my mind, is that it's fine to go up and say, in the interest of software freedom, I recommend, you don't use this binary blob, the binary blob in this kernel. Or, have you tried this free operating system, let's say GNU Sense or something like that? That's great. But it's when it's an unrelenting force, it can actually be very, very disruptive. And it's always difficult because the people who are typically very, very passionate about this are doing it in the interest of software freedom. But it doesn't benefit anybody's interest of software freedom when developers are driven away. So when thinking about how we approach debates as well, think about how it can impact other people, because people who get very, very strongly invested in the debate, we don't all have the same thickness of skin, and every single one of us, myself included, will have bad days, and sometimes you'll feel like the world is trampling on your shoulders. And that can make people lose the faith a little bit, and that can drive good people away. So it would be wrong of me to continue without talking about Ubuntu. Anyone use Ubuntu? Hey, lots of Ubuntu people. Ubuntu's been an interesting ride, and it's been fun to be part of that ride. And in the Ubuntu community, we're all really proud of the success, but we're also really, really, really keen to move forward and really try and achieve in other areas as well, and really push it forward. And when I joined Canonical about 1.5 years ago to be the Ubuntu Community Manager, and the basic aim of the job is to enable the community to do stuff effectively and efficiently. It's not about me telling people what to do and it's not about me taking credit for the success of the community. It's about trying to enable other people to do things. You might have 3 or 4 different teams who work together, helping those teams to work together, figuring out things where we can avoid bottlenecks and disagreements and things like that. Luckily, I work with a pretty smart group of people, and from talking to them and evaluating where we can move forward, I thought it was important to sit down and define a mission about what to do. And this is my approximate mission. I want to produce the reference implementation of free software community done right. I want people to look at the Ubuntu community and say, you know what, those guys, they really do it right. They get the picture. They understand how to do it. They can keep people motivated and interested and excited and produce really cool stuff. So when other people are building new communities and other distributions and other companies and whatever, they can say, you know, if we're going to do it, we should do it the way the Ubuntu people did it. That's the broad goal, and we're I think we're doing reasonably well there, but there's still a long road to travel. Luckily, on this road, I have a couple of cohorts who work for me at Canonical. First one is this guy. This, my friends, is the future of the open source Ubuntu development community. He does actually like walking around with a flower in his ear as well, and wearing ridiculous sunglasses. This is Daniel Holbach. He lives in Berlin, and he runs he basically encourages more and more developers to join up with Ubuntu. So does anybody here do any packaging? Yeah? Is it Debian packaging? So packaging is a really, really great way to contribute to a distribution. And we're spending an awful lot of time and effort on encouraging more and more people to come and join up with Ubuntu and do packaging. So one thing we've announced recently is we're doing an Ubuntu Developer Week pretty soon. And it's a bunch of IRC tuition sessions where people can go and learn about different aspects of packaging, how to patch packages, how to package libraries, packaging Python, getting involved in the community, security updates, all this kind of stuff. So if you're interested in packaging, he's the man to talk to. I'll talk about that in a second as well. Then the other guy is this man. This is George Castro, and George works with upstream relations. So he works with upstream projects, so we can try and make sure that Ubuntu and upstream projects are working well together, working efficiently together, and both sides of the bridge are getting a mutual benefit from that. And George is doing an excellent job. And then I run the team, and as part of my work with the team, I try to define some strategy about where we move forward and the kind of community that we want to build, and understanding the different elements of the community and how they fit together, coming up with some schemes of how we can achieve growth and make sure people are reporting stuff effectively and all that kind of stuff. And when building an open source community, and when you've got a lot of people in that community, it's always a good idea to kind of figure out the core things that you want to maintain, because when confronted with a huge jigsaw puzzle, it can be very, very difficult to see the big picture, because you can really get engulfed in the detail. And the most important thing is that it's inclusive. Every open source community has to feel like anyone can join if they're good, because we're a meritocracy, and everybody should feel that if they join that community and they're good, they will move forward, that they will be appreciated. And there's way too much division in some communities where, and this is something that I know a lot of women have suffered from, where women have joined an open source community and not felt inclusive because of prejudice against women in technical positions and this kind of stuff. And it's just insane. So this isn't just a case of ensuring that we encourage all people into a community. This is at a social level as well. But the other thing is making sure everyone can have an impact. If somebody joins a community and they do something, they need to feel like their something had an impact on the bigger picture. If someone joins the Ubuntu community to make packages, they need to feel that the work that they've done will benefit the wider community. And if they don't feel that because they've got to jump through too many hoops or whatnot, they'll get bored and they'll leave. And we've all seen people join projects and say, yeah, I really want to help, this would be brilliant, I'm really psyched up and motivated. And then they do a couple of things, and they might write a patch. It then gets attached to a bug in Bugzilla or Launchpad, and then they think, well, it took a while for that patch to be reviewed, and then it was applied. But by the time it was applied, my interest was waning, and You know, I was working late nights, and I didn't really have much time, and my wife went to bingo one night, and, you know, I thought I had time there, but I had to clean the dishes, or whatever. You know, people find excuses. Whereas if someone joins a community and they do something interesting, and then it gets published, it gets utilized immediately, they're like, wow, I joined up, and within next to no time I was doing stuff that helps everybody. So it's important that we have a turnaround to make sure everyone can feel like they're having an absolute impact on stuff. And the only way you can make an impact and make people feel like they can have an impact is if they feel the community is their own. If you feel like the community is run by someone else, particularly a company, you can kind of feel like it doesn't really feel like a community. You know, there's some companies out there who will profess to have a community, but it's actually just cheap labor. You know, it's people joining up and helping out, but it's very much on the terms of a commercial organization. And these companies have generally failed at this approach. And consequently, we see more and more companies doing it the right way. But to make sure that people feel it is their own, you need to make sure it's properly governed. And governance is a really, really difficult balance to get. Because when you've got, you know, 100,000 people who each one have an impact, you've got 100,000 different perspectives on how it should be run. So the first thing we have in the Ubuntu world is a code of conduct. And this code of conduct basically says, be excellent to each other. Make sure that when you do stuff, it pretty much works out. We have membership processes. You know, we make sure that people can join up. They can join that community so long as they can demonstrate sustained and reliable contributions. They can be a member of the Ubuntu community. And then we have like these other governing councils. We have the community council, which is right at the top. There's the majority of that council has people who don't work at Canonical, so it feels properly open. We have the technical board that decides what goes in there, and anybody who's good can apply to be on the technical board. And then we have team councils that govern each of these other different areas, such as IRC and forums and things like that. And the thing is, we've got loads of teams. I did a presentation once, and I got a list of all of the Ubuntu teams in the world and put them next to each other, and the text was really, really small because there's hundreds of teams. And lots of people can join the project in different ways. And part of the reason for this is diversity. I mean, you want diversity. So we have different derivative distributions. Does anyone here use like Kubuntu or Edubuntu or something like that? Which one do you use? Kubuntu, yeah? Because people want to be able to... A lot of people want to take the ethos behind Ubuntu and much of the technology and then just roll their own. And we've got... I mean, this is just a small smattering of some of the derivatives, but there's loads of these derivatives out there. And it's great. And in the Ubuntu community, we love the idea of that. Because much of the core aspects of the system is actually the same. It's just people layering on different chunks. So it's a very, very diverse community. So I just want to talk about two things before I wrap up, two areas which I think are of particular interest in the community right now. First one is packaging. You mentioned you've done some packaging. This is a really, really great way to get involved. And this is something that we're actively keen to recruit as new packagers. And basically, it's taking upstream software and making it easy to install on an Ubuntu system. So we have main, which is our main repository, which has the stuff that's on the disk, generally lives in main. And then we also have another repository called Universe, which is basically Debian that's been built against Ubuntu. So we have Universe, and the people who look after Universe are the masters of the universe. We call them Motu, masters of the universe. And we're all just big He-Man fans, you know. The council that looks after it, we call it Council Grayskull. You know, it goes to a very, very deep level. But Universe is not only a means of looking after Universe, but it's also means it's the sandbox in which people get started. So people if you join Motu, that you can read the packaging guide. It tells you how to make a package, how to attach that package to a bug in the sponsorship queue, so someone can review it and assess how good the package is. People can give you feedback. There's resources there. There's regular tutorials. There's regular Q&As. There's events. There's things like the Ubuntu Developer Week. There's local events at Lugs, like packaging jams that we're running. There's lots and lots of resources out there for people to get involved. So people invariably, if you're interested in packaging, join Motu, and then there's lots of resources there to get involved. So this is the address for it. If you If you can't remember that or you can't write it down, then feel free to email me at jono@ubuntu.com and I can point you in the right direction or come and talk to me at the end of this presentation. But Motu, if you're interested in helping Ubuntu and contributing to Ubuntu, this is an excellent, excellent means of moving on. The other thing is locos. These are local user groups. We have over 160 of them all around the world. There's a Californian team that just represented Ubuntu at scale. And these people are just going out there and spreading the love. And this huge community all over the world are doing some excellent work with this. And a good example of this was in the US. The US was a bit like Where's Waldo? You couldn't find any teams. Everywhere in the world, apart from Africa, had teams coming out their ears. But for some reason in the US, there was no teams. And we just could not figure out why. So we spent some effort in talking to some prominent US people. And they set the audacious goal of having a team in every state in the US by the end of 2007. And this is the map at the moment. So they've all the states that are yellow have got teams in them. The ones that are green are particularly good teams that we call approved teams. So that just shows the progress that they made in about 8 months. It's absolutely stunning. The user groups around the world, and these people get out and they advocate the use of Ubuntu and things like that. So wrapping up, the moral of this story is: when you're sat in front of your computer and it's 1 o'clock in the morning and you've watched all the YouTube videos there are to watch, you've added all of your friends on Facebook, and you're thinking to yourself, I don't want to go to bed yet because I'm a nerd, and I can't go to bed before the sun starts rising. And you think, I want to contribute in some way. When you think the success, the mass success of the Linux desktop is something that other people have an impact on, don't. Remember how it all percolates together. Upstream software gets packaged. Businesses buy that software. Businesses invest in that software. That software is made by us. Therefore, we have an absolute impact on how it works. And I think if we all take ourselves a little bit more seriously in this regard, then we can make the desktop happen a lot quicker. Thanks very much, everyone.